is when you're building a movement, what are some of the ideas that need to form? And like, for example, question of resources. I mean, the question has to be asked, who do the resources belong to? Whose resources are these that we have in nature? And I think these kind of questions are imperative, because then with that we can look at what is the what are the state is doing, and what are the demands of the people. But these issues have to be. It's not a question of violence in that sense. It's a question of livelihood, rights, justice, and one of the things that comes to my mind is that when one is asking something of the state, this state, what kind of a state is it? What's its requirement? What is it demanding? So if it's doing globalization, then there's something already wrong. So we really need to, theoretically base ourselves on new ideas of where, resources, like for example resources, who do they belong to? Why can't we ask that question? And why can't we say that resources have to belong to the people that live in those areas? We've got to sort of build on these bases, on new ideas, because you said US specialists are sitting there. Of course they are, because they've got experience in this nation. The native Indians, the natives of this country, they've destroyed them. So they have a lot of experience in how they did it. So I think we've really got to push on the basis of what is the requirement of human beings.
Absolutely.
So we don't push, it can't be on the basis of violence or this, but we do have to push on the basis of who does this belong to? All of the basis of these things,
Because that is the crux of these movements which are actually taking place in India. It's a question of resources and livelihood. Because if you bring it down to the basics, that is the basic question. Because resource, that's why this entire thing is defined by these three words, jal, jungle, zameen, water, forest, land. So the question of possession and utilization of resources is the crux of the matter. And because large number of India's population is dependent on resources for livelihoods become the most important matter. And these questions are coming up, those movements are raising these questions. For example, this movement in Odisha, this POSCO movement, they are over in that area, and they are saying that our economy is based on three things: the paddy, the fish, and this beetle. Okay, these are resources on which we have our right. Why would a company which is in Korea would need to come and require exactly this piece of land, okay, to set up its factory? Okay. Now then we tell to them, okay, because you are on a coast, and you have a river nearby whose mouth they have got to build a captive port. You have got an iron ore mine 100 kilometers from here, from them will get cheap iron ore. That's why they need this area. So the entire question is a question of control over resources. Okay. That is the same thing in this Chhattisgarh where the mass insurgency is going on. That is the case. That was the case in Nandigram, Singur, etc. And the general understanding of all these people's movement is that resources should be the control over the resources should be that of the people in that area. Okay. Now this thing.
If you just even those areas, I mean, if you even take the question of peasants. Yeah. I mean, they produce, and yet what they produce isn't in their control. So prices and what they grow it's others deciding. So I think it's really it's a much wider question of what the issues are, because it's only a certain section has a control over all of these resources. And I think so for a movement we have to bind all of these different aspects. I mean, the amount of farmers that are committing suicide. I mean, these are issues because they have no control over what they produce, or where that production they do, where does it go? So I think it's we have to rally all of these different connections. So it's not just an area of that area of Middle India, but it's actually
that's what
of a whole.
Actually, it's actually the nature of the Indian state which has become like this. Because the Indian state, as the state policy is following neoliberalism, through this globalization. It's basically what is happening is this entire country is being colonized by corporates. Okay, so this is basically, and every policy of the Indian state is leading to this end. So it's a general struggle against the policy, against the nature of the state. That's what it is becoming slowly. You know, the thing is still that all the movements don't talk with each other, they don't move together. But the general understanding is building that it is, as I was telling to this friend, just giving development will not solve the problem. It is questioning the fundamental direction of India's policies, which are being followed, and which is basically to serve global capital. You know, that is basically, so it is happening in every state, all over the country. Every policy is leading to that. Yeah, to you. Yeah.
Okay, I say this as someone who came here when I was 8, so it's basically an American, and go back every 3 years. And I think it's a little bit, I mean, and I say that as a very committed leftist on my own. My parents are very ashamed of my politics, but I feel like it's unfair to say it's just multinationals. I feel like there's an Indian middle class that's really benefited from globalization. My cousins, my aunts and uncles. And so I think when you say tackling the neoliberal state, neoliberal state is tackling multinationals, it doesn't seem fair to me. It seems to me that the middle class, my cousins, compared to my Taoji or my Fufas or whoever Buas, have such an individualistic sense, this very neoliberal breaking down of the commons. So I wish you would comment on the role of the middle class, because they're not supported. I mean, I've talked to them about these things. I know more about these things than they do, right? And I feel like they're natural allies of the neoliberal state because they benefit. There's 200 million people, and so and they have power, disproportionate power. So I would like, as an insider, as an activist, your comment on what the Indian middle class's role in this is, and as natural allies, I think, of neoliberalism.
Yeah, that is expected. See, the history of neoliberalism has been like this. If you look at Latin America, each of the Latin American states where neoliberalism was applied spawned the middle class.
But India is much larger and richer, right? I mean, that's what makes it difficult.
Yeah, the general population is larger, but on the other hand, similarly, the people who are resisting this, the number is also much larger. So if we take like absolute numbers into account. But the reality is, a certain section would benefit from this, Means that is how global capital functions, okay?
In Gramscian terms, you're describing it as despotic when it seems much more hegemonic. And I wish you could make the distinction between this hegemonic, role of neoliberalism versus the despotic. It's clearly despotic in these places, but it's hegemonic, I would argue, for the country as a whole. So,
absolutely. See,
how do you bridge that contradiction to change things?
See, basically, it is not like the multinational is really going on the ground and oppressing people.
Yeah.
Okay. It is the people who are actually part and parcel of this of India who are doing this basically. I mean, all these things what you see, there is this, and they are opinion makers. Their opinions are heard the loudest, and that is why you will hear everywhere in media that absolutely India is shining, India is growing, 9% growth rate, etc. So it must be benefiting some people. Okay. But what I think is happening, this benefit of this certain section of society, this middle class we are referring to, is completely contingent upon the pauperization of another section of society. So because this is not a zero-sum game, it is not the case that the entire thing is benefiting. Although statistics might look like that, it is not the case. This addition to this middle class, addition of prosperity to the middle class is happening at a cost of another people. The basic question comes to this, that why should the costs be borne by one section, whereas the benefits be enjoyed by another section? But that is the crux of the matter again, Means I can tell you of instances which you will see. When I was a student, I had gone, when this farmer suicides had begun, late in 1990s, I was a PhD student, I had gone a fact-finding in a village in Karnataka, which is a southern state, where the farmer suicides really went up. And I go to a village which is just beside a thermal power station, okay? His land is beside a thermal power station, and he's sitting there, he has a standing crop in his land, and he is lamenting that he doesn't get power, okay, in order to irrigate his crops, and his crops are withering. And this power lines from this power station which is built on his land, which is using his water, is going to the Bangalore, the capital city, to provide electricity to this middle class and to the software industry, which is there to serve, customers in this country, okay? And 1 week later, when I am going back to this village on my returning way, I hear this person has committed suicide. Okay, means his face, I can still remember his face. So yeah, so this person is paying the cost for the benefit which this so-called middle class is enjoying.
Oh, that there's no question.
Yeah, but on the
On
other hand, neoliberalism has a tendency of reducing its ambit. Means parts of the middle class are also now getting affected. Lower middle class is getting affected as a result of these policies. Because that is how neoliberalism functions. It tries to extract the maximum amount of profit out of finishing things like destroying things like state services, etc. Now, previously, a middle class who could, for example, send his child to a state school for like nearly free, now is being forced to pay more to send his son to a private school. This is because there is a section of the middle class which can actually afford to do that, but there is another section of the middle class which cannot afford to do that. Okay, so we would only see this opinion makers, our cousins, as you said, our families and all, who are the most vocal, but they are a vocal minority. And this minority is real minority. Means it's not even, I think, this 200 million. I had written somewhere something that is not more than 4 to 5% of the population who are really benefiting from this. The others are part of this entire machinery, machinery of exploitation. They are piston, nuts and bolts. So they are getting benefit out of it, but they are also getting worn down by the process.
Do you think there's any hope of showing the political unity of this notoriously reactionary lower middle class and peasants or Adivasi?
It has happened. So see, what happened in West Bengal in the post-Singur Nandigram period was that the West Bengal government thought that they would be able to achieve this, taking land away from peasants with the support of the middle class in the cities. They didn't expect that 50,000 people would come out on the streets of Calcutta to protest it. Who were this? These are the middle class. Okay, they tried to use the middle class by giving them hopes of jobs, this prosperity, and use them against farmers. But it doesn't work every time. This is a question of subjective conditions. If we can build consciousness, if we can keep on banging against this wall, this glass house of prosperity which has been built, the people will realize. So this has happened. The Singur Nandigram is an example that this has happened. Yeah, Amit, you were asking something.
I can ask later.
You can ask now.
Well, maybe it's a quick one actually.
Yeah, okay.
Actually, I was going back to the CPM and West Bengal and asking now with the regime change, what happens to the machinery, both in terms of Harmads and maybe other kinds of machinery that had been built up over such a long period?
This is an interesting question. So, the CPIM had developed a very intricate machinery of what I call intimidation and patronization in the entire state. On one hand, they would patronize you. Means in order to get this government some benefit, like a ration card or something, you would need to go to the CPI. Or for example, to get land deeds, after land distribution, you would need to be in the good books of this CPI. On the other hand, if you are out of the line, you would be intimidated. Okay, intimidation can go up to being killed. All right, this was a very intricate machinery they had built. Now, what happened? Two things have happened. One is that en masse, in various places, this machinery has shifted to this new ruling party, the Trinamool Congress. Okay, I know these people by face. Means in my area where I live, I know people who are CPIM activists, now they are Trinamool activists. Okay, many of them have actually fled from the state. So they have gone and taken shelter in other states also. So this thing, but the Trinamool Congress is dependent on these people because these are the people who are the vote-getting machinery. They are the people who will mobilize votes. They are experts in that. The CPIM had a very well-oiled machinery to mobilize votes. So they would be very invaluable addition to the thing. So this is happening on a large scale. On the other hand, what is happening in places there are conflicts are happening between whatever is left of the CPIM machinery and the new Trinamool machinery. So the West Bengal, it's very contentious. Everywhere there are clashes which is taking place. And I think you posted a news, somebody has said that in certain areas they're actually trying to reverse land reform. That's not the case. What is happening actually is this clash is going on. There's two groups fighting against each other. So that is the case over there.
So on that note, probably we should end, and if there are more questions, we can continue after this. Thank you very much. So if you want, you can take a booklet